There are various aspects of language to consider when studying language development. So this slide shows you the 6 aspects of language that are considered to be important. So first is phonetics and phonology. So phonetics is just physically producing speech sounds. Phonology is speech sounds that actually have meaning. So like the S sound in S has meaning because it implies plurality of words. So we're not really going to be talking about these 2 aspects in this lecture because those are things that come a little bit earlier in development. Children start making speech sounds earlier than preschool age, but I would encourage you to watch the YouTube video given on this slide. It will show you the difference between phonetics and phonology so that you have that kind of grounded in. What we're going to be focusing on instead is morphology, syntax, semantics, and pragmatics. So morphology is vocabulary, the words that you use. Syntax is grammar or putting sentences together. Semantics or discourse is the purpose of sentences, so trying to convey information, asking a question, doing an exclamatory statement to show excitement. That would all be related to discourse. And then pragmatics is how language is used with one another. So turn taking, not interrupting somebody, those kinds of issues would be related to pragmatics. There are 3 main theoretical orientations that go along with language development. One is nativist, or the nature side. The other is behaviorist, or the nurture side. And then there's sociolinguistic, which is a combination of nature-nurture. So the Khan Academy video on this slide does a very good job of explaining these 3 theories of language development, but just very quickly to add on. So basically when we're thinking about nativist theories like Noam Chomsky and the language acquisition device that he talked about, it's basically that the brain is pre-wired to acquire speech so that we come into the world with systems set and ready to go to help us to be able to acquire language. It does seem like children have some innate abilities to acquire language. They pick it up very quickly. They're paying attention to language. They're making speech sounds very early on. They use grammar rules in ways that wouldn't just be them mimicking how somebody else speaks. So when children say, I goed to the pool, they haven't heard anyone mimic the use of the word goed. It would be went to be appropriate in English language, but they are taking that ED rule and applying it liberally, which seems to indicate that they have some innate language structures to be able to pick up on the rules of language and apply them very quickly without having to hear it and then imitate. There's also the behaviorist view of learning speech. So we are replicating things that we've heard in our environment. There also seems to be some truth to this. When children use language incorrectly, we gently model the correct uses of language, and then over time they appropriate those uses. When children are babies, we say, "Mama, this is your mama," and they listen and eventually start producing that sound to refer to that person. So this would be through imitation and reinforcement. And then sociolinguistic is the maturation over time of using those pre-wired language acquisition devices combined with that social feedback to eventually create language across time. In the next few slides, we're going to look at developmental milestones from the learning foundations related to these different aspects of language development. So we're going to talk about vocabulary, then we'll talk about grammar, then we'll talk about discourse and pragmatics and what we know about young children and their skills and abilities in those areas. So at age 3, we expect children to be basically understandable to most adults. So if you have a child who's age 3 and you still don't really understand what they're trying to say, you don't understand the words that they're using, then there's probably some need to check and see if speech services are necessary. By about age 4, children should use basic words, generally accepted and used words for objects, actions, and attributes. So if a couch is called a couch in your house, they should be using the word couch. They should be using the word chair. If a child is working on being bilingual and there's the chair and the silla, and it's referred to either way, they should be able to use either of those two terms if that's what they've been listening to. They should use relational kinds of words. So this would be up, on, over, beside, between. If you look at the little YouTube video, it gives you a sense of what relationship words are, and they should be using commonly used relationship types of words. Once they get to 5, then they should start using various words for objects, actions, and attributes. So I don't know if you're aware, but couches can be called sofas and they can be called davenports. It depends on what era you grew up in and what part of the country you grew up in. And so now children are starting to acquire different words that they can use for the same objects. They may have more specific words. So, we know that sometimes a couch is called a love seat because it's a tiny couch. So they might understand now that that's a couch, but it's a love seat because only 2 people are meant to be sitting on it. So that would be a more specific word for an object, action, or attribute. And they should start expanding on the relationship words that they use. So very simple words, and now they're adding in more complexity to those relational terms. So for our 2-year-olds, I'm going to talk about both vocabulary and grammar in the same space. So on this slide, rather than having separate information on this slide and the next slide that talks about grammar, because the foundations for age 2 cut across both vocabulary and grammar, they don't separate them out. So typically around age 2, children they have a pretty good basic vocabulary of things that they need. So want, more, milk, mom, dad, dog, things that they want to talk about, things that they're interested in. What they do with regard to grammar is they take those words and they can use them together, but in a very simplified form. So typically 2-year-olds are using what is called a telephrase, T-E-L-E-P-H-R-A-S-E, so telephrase, which means 2-word communication. So they're taking those, they're grabbing a couple words and putting them together to convey a thought. So maybe they say, want milk, me up, dog go. So it is a sentence. It's just a sentence without any of the filler or extra words that older children are going to use. But we definitely expect to see 2-year-olds doing that. And they're also real good at using gestures, holding their arms up when they want to be picked up, shaking their head to say no. They can be taught to put up their hand when they want some space, when they want someone to back away from them. So definitely very communicative, just with a smaller vocabulary, a lot of gestures, and those telephrases. With regard to grammar, here are the things that we expect from children in the preschool period. So remember, grammar is putting sentences together. So at age 3, children should be able to make simple sentences. They may be up to, about 7 to 10 words per sentence, maybe a little bit less than that, but definitely putting words together into simple sentences. They should be able to use the grammar rules of their home language. So in English, we put the adjective before the noun, so the red dog. But in Spanish, the adjective comes after the noun, the dog who is red. So children should be able to use those grammatical rules that they've been hearing over the last 3 years. Once they get to ages 4 and 5, they should be able to make longer and more complex sentences, so combining 2 to 3 phrases. So my mom went to the store, she'll be back soon, which would be combining phrases. I like dogs and I want to get one. That would also be putting phrases together, using different concepts in sentences. So again, my mom went to the store and she'll be back soon. So putting together different ideas. They should also be able to use quite a bit of age-appropriate grammar. So they should have subject-verb agreement. Those things should line up together. So, past and present tense, using plurals correctly, incorporating pronouns, using possessives, regular and irregular past tense and plurals. So that would be things like, rather than goed, starting to incorporate things like went, because that is an irregular past tense. So lots and lots of very sophisticated grammar we should be expecting to see at age 4 to 5, which really is quite remarkable if you think about that they've only been speaking for a few years. So with discourse and pragmatics, again, remember this is sort of the meaning of sentences, the way in which language is used and how we use it in conjunction with someone else. That would be the pragmatic part. We do expect 3-year-olds to be able to engage in back and forth conversations with a number of turns. Sometimes 3-year-olds kind of talk about what they want to talk about, and then the other person talks about what they want to talk about, but they do go back and forth. With adults, they do a little better with talking about the same thing with each other. At ages 4 to 5, children should be able to use language to communicate in familiar social situations. So at school where they're comfortable, at home where they're comfortable, with people that they're comfortable with, and they should be able to start using language to communicate in unfamiliar situations when they're around 5. And then also they should be able to use language to construct a short narrative, to tell a little story. So there's a cute video on this slide that shows a little boy telling a little narrative and telling you a little story, so that you can see kind of what a 4 to 5-year-old story should look like.
Children age 6 to 8 have a lot of really amazing language skills, so they've got all the basics down. They've got a really large vocabulary that keeps expanding exponentially as they read more, have more experiences, talk to more people. So as the slide says, they literally know, use, and understand thousands of words, which is a very big jump from their 2-year-old selves who had a few words and used some gestures along with those. So generally, they are very good at using this language capacity that they have. They can use it to explain themselves, to express their opinions, to tell lies, to solve problems, to talk about how they think problems should be solved, to tell jokes and puns and riddles, use some bad words just thrown in for some shock value to see what adults will do. But it is important to remember that socially and emotionally, these are still fairly young children. They do get emotional about things. They do get their feelings hurt. So don't be surprised if even the most vocal of children loses it and has a hard time expressing themselves effectively when they're upset. Maybe their aggression is showing, maybe they're yelling, but it's not that they're trying to be argumentative or difficult. It's just hard to effectively use our words when we get upset. But really, kids at this age have a great ability to use language for all kinds of purposes. We should not really have any speech sound issues at this point. So if you still have a child who is making some speech sounds in error, it's probably a good time to have them visit a speech therapist and see if they can work on those kinds of things, because that should be something that's in the past by this point in time.
So because bilingualism is so prevalent in our country and particularly in our state and the area that we live in, I wanted to spend some time talking about bilingualism and what that looks like and sort of what the rate of bilingualism is in the United States. So bilingualism, just to start out with a definition, it could be multilingualism, so it could either be speaking 2 languages, bilingualism, or speaking more than 2 languages, which is multilingualism. And so basically this is speaking and understanding 2 or more languages. As you can see, bilingualism in the United States and particularly in California is extremely common. So if you're going to work with preschool age children, you will have children who either are bilingual or are currently learning a second language. So this is something that you need to consider and think about. Think about both how you can support that child in your classroom and how you can help that child to reap the benefits of bilingualism that it talks about on the next slide. Unfortunately, there used to be a school of thought that bilingualism or multilingualism should not be encouraged. I'm thankful and grateful that that has changed, and now we realize that speaking 2 or more languages is a positive thing. You find more and more school programs where children are introduced to more than 1 language at early ages if that's not something that they're exposed to at home. And there are schools you can go to that are fully bilingual so that children really have a head start on this wonderful opportunity to speak more than 1 language. So we do know that there are great benefits of bilingualism or multilingualism. So you can see that it's associated with increased abilities to concentrate, being able to solve problems better, being able to focus better, better mental flexibility, increased cultural competence. More and more, this is a global community, so having that ability to speak more than 1 language, definitely helps you in this global environment, stronger connections to place and family, and greater access to higher paying jobs, because a lot of jobs are looking for someone who can speak more than 1 language. That information that I've just spoken about is from the Kids Count Data Center, and I would also really encourage you to watch the TED Talk on this slide. It also demonstrates some benefits of being bi or multilingual. These stages are what we would expect for coordinate bilinguals. So that would be children who have already learned a first language at home and who are now working on learning a second language at school. So these are kids who would continue to use their first language in their home setting while simultaneously learning a second language in the school setting. And so remember that these are not months and years in terms of how old the child is. This is how many months or years we expect children to be in each of these stages. So to wrap up this lecture, let's talk about ways to facilitate language development, both for children who are monolingual, children who are bi or multilingual, and children who may be having speech or language issues. So we've got to cover all 3 things. We've got to make sure that we're providing good supportive environments for all of these different permutations of what children are experiencing. So first of all, just in general, you should always use child-centered language. This doesn't mean using baby talk. It doesn't mean talking down to children. So, you don't need to use made-up words or made-up phrases. You can use, typical adult vocabulary, but just think about what children are interested in and what they would like to talk about and what they need to know about a particular topic. So think about what's relevant, and then as they get older, you can keep adding on more and more. But it doesn't mean that you should be, again, using different words or making up kind of baby talk words. can use regular vocabulary and just think about what it is that children need to know, and talk about, again, things that are interesting to them so that they'll pay attention, things that they want to know about. That's really what child-centered language means. So this bleeds into the next bullet, so providing for meaningful discourse, talking about real things, things that children see and touch and have done and are doing. The more that you can talk about things that are directly relevant to children's experiences and things that they're interested in and things about their family, the more they're going to pay attention, the more they're going to participate in the conversation, because it's this is going into the third bullet. It's not just talking to children or at them, it's talking with them. So when you talk about things that children are interested in, have experienced, and are doing, they're much more likely to participate in the conversation and learn about that two-way dialogue, because that's part of that pragmatics piece, is learning how to engage in a conversation with others, not just be talked at or talked to. So also, when you are engaging in language with children, make sure to think about how to elevate the conversation. So your textbook on pages 314 to 315 has a nice conversation about using elaborative talk that includes open-ended questions. So elaborations are when the conversation provides children with additional information about some sort of phenomenon. So, I always tell students, if you're talking to a 1-year-old and you say, "Ooh, you have a red car," that's an elaboration. That child may not know that that thing they're holding is a car, and they may not know that it's red. If you're talking with a preschool age child, "You have a red car" isn't very meaningful or expansive or elaborative, because they more than likely know that it's a car and they know that it's red. So what else can you add in? "Oh, that looks like a sports car. Sports cars go really fast. I wonder if your car goes really fast." So really thinking about how you can give some new, interesting information in the conversation. And then asking children questions where it encourages more than a one-word answer. So, what do you think would happen if? What were you thinking about? I wonder what the result of this would be, rather than, "Oh, is your car red? Oh, did you have a good time?" Because those require a yes/no answer or a one-word answer. So open-ended questions really encourage that two-way conversation that keeps that back and forth ball going. So then also, in thinking about what we just learned about bilingual and multilingualism and how prevalent it is and the stages that children go through, we also need to be respectful and support dual and multi-language learners, because there are some needs that are slightly different. So your book has some great information on page 316 to 320 about how to respect and support dual and multi-language learners, and then also the video I've provided on this slide also has some good tips and ideas for you. And then finally, unfortunately, sometimes children do experience speech and language difficulties, and we need to make sure that we're identifying those potential problems and then thinking about what we need to do to help children with those kinds of issues. So I would direct you to your book, pages 321 to 325. It gives you information about what some potential problems in early childhood are related to language development, and then also the article at the bottom of the slide also gives you some more information about speech, language, and hearing disorders.